We're going to make a YouTube video today.
Wait, really? I saw your YouTube account.
Alright. If you're a good crowd, it'll go on YouTube. If not, it won't. What we're going to do, I'll explain that in a second. Stop interrupting me. I'm going to show you how to draw this really quickly. I'm going to explain how to draw this. What is this thing? Does anybody remember? Yeah?
An isometric castle.
Yeah, so this is the basic template we use to make our isometric castle. So that's one class's attempt. This is a shaded one. You got some grid paper. So you draw this. You draw this shape in pencil. Go over it in pen. Once you go over it in pen, that's when you start to add detail. And you can draw things that look like this. You can add a cliff. You can add a river, a gate, pyramids. Okay? But what this video will be is just explaining how to do this. So that if anybody gets lost, there's a reference there for people to look at. Alright, so the first thing, I'm gonna run through it real quick. Then I'll just stop the video and we'll do it step by step. Alright, so first things first, finding the beginning point of our drawing. The beginning point is going to be 210 over and 30 up. Okay, why is it 210 over? Yes? Yeah, that's halfway through the page. That's half the length of the page. Alright, so there's my little beginning point. Once I've got my little beginning point, I make sure I hold my T-square in place. I slide my set square along so that it hits that little dot there. And then I rule a line. You are going to be marked on accuracy. So if you're not holding your tools correctly, then you'll get marked down. So you start with a V shape. Our object needs to be 140 by 140. So if I measure up here 140, 140, and put little marks, they're my next two reference points to rule. I hold the T-square in place, rule a line this way, and rule a line that way. How heavy should my lines be right now? Yeah, really light. Alright, so that's the shape that it lives inside. We now draw a grid, and we use that grid to plot out our objects. So that'll make sense in 1 second. The grid is a 20 millimeter grid. So now, put your set square in place. Every 20 millimeters, put a little mark. If you put big blobby circular marks, they're no good. Those big blobby circular marks are like 2 millimeters thick. It means you're not being as accurate as you can. So tiny little marks, as close to the measurement as possible. The more mistakes you make at this point, the more magnified they are later on. Slide my set square across. Line it up with each little dot. Slide. Slide. So I've got lines going this way, flip it in the opposite direction, lines going that way. Alright, I'm going as quick as possible. So there's my grid. It's nice and straight and clean. So the grid kind of becomes a little bit like Battleship now. And you use the grid to plot out where you're going to draw your objects. So does everybody know Battleship? So you count over and count down, and that's how you select where you're going to place bombs in Battleship. Same with this, except instead of choosing the squares, we select the points where the lines meet. Alright, so we're going to draw this object. this square shape. To find that square shape, you measure 1, 2. Go down 2 points. Go over 2. 1, 2. Go down 2, 1, 2. And go up 2, 1, 2. So those 4 corners are the corners of my tower. Slide my set square along. Rule a line that goes up. Go to the other corner. Rule a line that goes up. You also want to rule a line in the front and the back corner. But because you are being accurate, those 2 dots will be perfectly aligned. When you rule 1, it goes through both. Right, now, our tower is 90 millimeters high. Put your T-square in place, measure up 90, and put a little mark. Then we rule over, flip. There's our next point. So where the lines meet is where you draw your lines from. Hopefully that makes sense. We've got our tower, and at this point, it's good to use heavy line weight. You're going to go over this with a fine tip liner. A fine liner is not a texter. Textures are really thick and they bleed. Fine liners are very thin and they're designed so that when you put the ink on the paper, it doesn't spread out. That's what's good about a fine liner. Textures are good for coloring in big areas. Fine liners are good for little fine details. All right, tower in the middle of my page. Now, wall that goes around the tower. The tower, the wall, begins in the front, goes all the way to one side, all the way to one side. Does that make sense? All right, so slide our tool over, line up with this side, go up. Go over, line up, go up. Each corner, a little line that goes up. You don't need to do it at the back corner because you've already drawn that line. Alrighty, does that make sense? Alright, the height of the wall. Rule up 1. First little dot. Rule over. Rule over. Okay, there's my front 2 walls. What do I have to do now? Any guesses?
Go like go into the
So we've got to put the backs on the walls. So we got these 2 little meeting points now. If we're holding the tool correctly, we can just rule a line that goes back and rule a line that goes back. So it's actually pretty easy. The one thing you really need to worry about to begin with is the grid. If the grid's out of whack, everything else becomes out of whack. We've got our wall, but our wall has no depth. So now we're going to put depth into the wall. To put depth into the wall, we're going to plot out these points. Here's our first corner. Measure up 1 position and put a dot. Here's our next corner. Come over 1 position and put a dot. Our next corner, come over 1 position and put a dot. Holding the tools correctly. Rule. Flick in the opposite direction. Rule. You've got this point that goes this way. All right, I'm almost entirely done except for 2 things. Who can spot the 2 things? Yes. No.
The line.
So we got to draw 2 lines here to represent the inside of the wall. Yeah. So luckily the grid is there, and you can use the grid to put the 2 lines in. Thank you. So if you that is how easy it is. All right? Pretty simple, right? We'll spend time in class doing it, but that's just a quick guide. I'll publish this online and I'll show you where to get it later on. But yeah, that is how we're going to do this. All right, we might as well say goodbye now. So everyone say goodbye to YouTube.
Bye, YouTube. Subscribe.
Subscribe to the channel.
Record, add things and